I know I'm over a year late to make a video on Anatomy of a Fall, but I rewatched it recently in cinema in Perse, where they host an annual film festival, and it really changed my perspective on the movie. I first watched it in March, shortly after it won the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay. Aside from the great lines such as this one,
"You're not a victim! Not at all! Your generosity conceals something dirtier and meaner!"
Aside from that, I didn't really like the movie. It was long, the movie is 2 hours and a half, wordy, and above all, I felt very unsatisfied with the ending. Sandra, our main protagonist, even says so.
It's just, when you lose, you lose. It's the worst thing that can happen, and if you win, you kind of expect some reward. But there isn't any. It's just over.
However, it was only after watching the movie for a second time that I was able to appreciate the movie for its themes rather than the intrigue at the heart of the story. Going into it, I knew that there was the theme of romance between artists and the rivalry that may stem out of it. I've seen it firsthand with artist friends. The failing artist is an interesting character to develop, and the way they cope with their situation and their broken dreams is definitely worth exploring, as many of us, artists, may relate to it. But what made me appreciate my second viewing of Anatomy of a Fall wasn't these themes, however relevant they may be. What made me fall in love with Anatomy of a Fall was the theme of chaos. I want to look at the movie through the theme of chaos, and I could have used complexity or nuance to describe this theme, but by looking at it through that lens, I really fell in love with that movie. Really quickly, Anatomy of a Fall follows Sandra, a famous writer who's suspected of killing her husband, who just died from falling out of a window. A trial is set and is discussed the death of her husband, Samuel, his mental health, and his relationship to his wife. The reason why Samuel's mental health and his relationship to his wife are discussed is because we're trying to figure out, the viewer as well as the jury, why Samuel died. The district attorney is trying to convince us that Sandra murdered Samuel. Sandra's defense is that Samuel killed himself. The movie's ending was disappointing the first time I watched it because, spoilers, we're not entirely convinced that Samuel killed himself. The movie doesn't objectively tell us he did. All we know is that the jury doesn't find Sandra guilty of the murder. We don't know for sure how and why Samuel died. And this uncertainty at the end is really frustrating, isn't it? Normally, we'd know how Samuel died and we'd return home with the satisfaction that justice prevailed. But that's not how things go normally in real life. Things are more complex, they're less clearly established, they're more nuanced. We'll go back to the ending of the movie later. In the scene with the psychiatrist, Sandra needs to speak English to convey the complexity of the situation. It's already difficult to convey complexity because you need to simplify it in order to communicate it. Nevertheless, through a translator, this whole process of communicating complexity is even more tedious. But it's what she says later to the psychiatrist that really illustrates the tension at the core of the movie.
But what you say is just, it is just a little part of the whole situation, I mean, sometimes a couple is kind of a chaos, and everybody is lost, no?
Sandra says a similar thing when talking of the recording of her fight with her husband.
That recording is not reality. It is a part of it, maybe. If you have an extreme moment in life, an emotional peak, and you focus on it, of course it crushes everything. It may seem like irrefutable proof, but actually warps everything. It's not reality, it's our voices, that's true, but it's not who we are.
I don't give a fuck about what is reality.
She feels like her relationship to her husband is being narrowed down to an event, and that the complexity and the nuances, the chaos of their relationship is being ironed out in order to make sense of it. The whole trial is trying to make sense of this chaos, make sense of a complicated situation happening within the context of a complicated relationship. We have multiple characters trying to make sense of this chaos through communication, but as I said, trying to communicate what's complex without oversimplifying is extremely difficult. Relationships and the situations they bring are complex. They're mediated by different experiences, situations, cultures, languages, etc., and by other relationships, which are themselves mediated by different cultures, languages, experiences, etc. You get the point. It's impossible to perfectly communicate the complexity of a relationship and the nuances it deserves. The context required to do so is one that is lived through experiences that may last several years. The process of communicating anything is one of synthesizing, simplifying, and ironing out nuances to make what you're saying more easily understandable. We can take a simple example of the relationship between Sandra and the journalism student who interviews her. The movie opens up with their conversation. Was it flirty? Was it friendly? Was it professional? Was it casual? As viewers, we can't really tell. We can guess at best, but what is this guess's worth when I'm willing to bet that the two characters involved don't even know themselves if there's seduction happening? When the student is asked if there was seduction, she answers that it's subjective, that the meaning of the word seduction for her could be very different for the jury. The complexity of their interaction, the complexity of seduction and its implications makes it hard to communicate. This kind of subjectivity, when added to the chaos, is present all throughout the trial. When Sandra is asked if she had cheated in the past, she said no, that she had a couple of flings with other people, but she didn't consider it cheating because she was honest to Samuel about it. Though this might sound strange to some, she really feels that way. I was told it was a very German way to think, but the DA said that it was an interesting conception of honesty and of feelings, judging her for the way she subjectively experiences and views the world. Sandra is trying to convey a complex and nuanced situation happening within a complex and nuanced relationship. To better understand it, the district attorney tries to categorize it. He asks if they were in an open relationship, if they had an arrangement, but this categorization, however, escapes the nuances necessary to understand the situation. Anatomy of a Fall loves to dwell in these gray areas where no answers are given. We navigate the chaos without really knowing what the truth is. And I really admire the movie for that. There's a required humility in admitting that we don't know, in never taking things for granted, and in not hastily categorizing things in order to simplify them and obtain some simple and easy answers. There's one character who does this, and he's the only detestable one in the movie. It's the district attorney. There's also the psychiatrist, but we'll stick to the DA. He's depicted with little nuance and is shown to tackle issues as such. He's the antagonist for this reason. The DA is unwilling to understand the nuances and complexities of Sandra's relationship and the situations it caused. He's trying to get answers by simplifying everything, by taking out the nuances. And that's his job, in a way. Again, to untangle the chaos as a group, you need shortcuts, you need common references and categorizations. However, this makes the DA extremely irritable, and this shows, at least to me, how committed Anatomy of a Fall is to defending complexity and nuance in defending chaos. Before going to the conclusion, let's talk about the end. As I said, after my first viewing, the ending was, to me, the weakest part of the movie. After watching it for a second time, however, it might be the best. Sandra and Vincent, her lawyer, have a history, but we're not really given much details about it. There's definitely a tension between the two characters. She puts her life in his hands. Normally, this would result in them dating or kissing or sleeping together by the end of the movie. But things rarely go normally. In the real world, they're much more complex than that. Sandra and Vincent don't date, kiss, or sleep together. Their relationship ends like this. Maybe they'll see each other again, but as far as we're concerned, their relationship ends. There's no winning or losing, it just ends. If we expected a simple ending, happy or sad, we might have expected too much, as Samuel says. It's not black nor white, it's this gray area, this nuance that Anatomy of a Fall explores. The best way Anatomy of a Fall depicts the chaos inherent in subjectivity is by refusing to take an objective stance. We can only experience what happened through subjective accounts or imagination. We see the death through Daniel's imagination twice, through two different scenarios, and we see the recording of the argument, but it's not necessarily objective. The members of the audience could only hear the recording, so what we're seeing is a product of their imagination. This sequence is abruptly interrupted when we hear violence, glass breaking, and some hitting.
I can't stand any more of your fucking hate! You're violent!
That's when a heavier load of assumptions would be required to illustrate the recording, which the movie doesn't do. It gives us the job of illustrating what's happening, who's hitting who's breaking stuff. We, again, don't have answers. Through the trial, where the chaos is being untangled, we have two sides who seem certain of their position. Sandra killed her husband, or Samuel killed himself. Daniel is forced to make a decision and is extremely confused because he doesn't have answers, but is still required to make a choice. He discusses this with Marge and asks her if this means that he has to fake being certain. She says no. The only person who knows for certain what happened is Sandra, at least in terms of if she murdered Samuel or not, of course. But aside from her, everyone needs to make a decision without knowing what happened, with the humility of saying, I need to take a position, but I don't know all the facts. I can't know all the facts. It's an uncomfortable situation to be in. When I reviewed Nerdwriter's book, which is very good by the way, go check it out, I criticized him for an essay in which he shares his uneasiness to take political positions when the experts disagree. He said that he didn't know without a doubt which policies were better, nobody does, and therefore he said he had a hard time doing political advocacy. What Anatomy of a Fall seems to be saying is that decisions need to be taken with humility, while knowing that the chaos, the nuances and complexities of a situation can never be entirely grasped. Despite this, decisions need to be taken. To end this video on a cliche, in an increasingly polarized world, and I'm saying this as someone with polarized opinions, it's important to remember that our decisions and our opinions are always shaped by incomplete information. That doesn't make your opinion automatically wrong, of course, but it does force you to be skeptical of your opinions and always reevaluate them. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you Roman Brandel, X-Towns, Bagel Speece, and all my other patrons for supporting the channel. If you also want to help out, leave a like, subscribe, and check out patreon.com/thecanvas. Thank you so much.